He wrote Hollywood's rules himself. He was the strongest, toughest, and most untouchable man on screen, Marlon Brando. Yet, for the most tragic role of his life, he didn't need a tuxedo or a movie set. All that was needed was the cold, harsh light of a courtroom in Los Angeles in 1990. The whole world witnessed the ruin of his family. His son was accused of murder. All of Brando's genius, all his charisma, and all his money knelt before this real tragedy. History books tell you about Brando's films and his achievements, but they do not tell you about the silent scream that killed him spiritually. They do not tell you how those tears he shed on the witness stand sealed a father's soul forever. This is the untold story of the moment an icon was forced to beg for his son's fate, and how that testimony destroyed Hollywood's biggest star. The roots of this tragedy lay in Brando's stormy life in the 1950s. Brando was famous not only for his genius, but also for his selfish and uncontrolled personality. He grew up with an alcoholic and neglectful mother, and these traumas were reflected in the complicated relationships he repeatedly had with different women in his adulthood. Christian Brando was born right in the middle of this chaos. His mother, Brando's first wife Anna Koshfi, was a beautiful actress of Indian Welsh descent, but their marriage turned into a nightmare. The couple quickly separated, and Christian was caught in the middle of the custody battle between Brando and Koshfi. Christian spent time with his father, but these times were overshadowed by Brando's famous guests and capricious lifestyle. Brando showed Christian affection, but this love lacked stability and consistency. The rule in Brando's house was chaos itself. The home was filled with constantly changing step-siblings, servants, and temporary lovers. Christian felt lost and vulnerable in this colossal confusion. Brando loved his son very much, but didn't know how to raise him. Just like his own family had done, he passed on emotional neglect as a legacy to his son. Christian dropped out of school in his youth, began to experience drug and alcohol problems. He was arrested several times. His father sent money and lawyers to solve the problem, but he was never emotionally present. Christian had turned into a troubled young man, crushed under his father's colossal shadow. The story of the murder victim, Dag Drollet, was the second part of this tragedy. Dag was the boyfriend of Brando's daughter from another relationship, Cheyenne Brando. Cheyenne, just like Christian, was a victim of her father's chaotic lifestyle. She was already struggling with mental health issues. In 1989, Cheyenne lived with Dag Drollet on her father's island in Tahiti. However, Cheyenne's psychological state was progressively deteriorating. At that time, she had even begun experiencing delusions related to Brando's mother, who had committed suicide. Cheyenne was pregnant. Christian Brando closely observed his sister's troubled relationship. Christian believed that Cheyenne was being physically abused by Dag Drollet. Dag was a quiet, gentle man, but Cheyenne's instability and paranoid suspicions led Christian to believe that Dag was the bad guy who was harming his sister. In May 1990, Cheyenne and Dag moved to Brando's Brentwood mansion in Los Angeles. Christian was already staying at the mansion. The house, which should have been a place of peace for Brando, had now become a tinderbox ready to explode. Christian's obsession escalated the moment he stepped into the mansion. Cheyenne's suspicions turned into a concrete hatred against Dag. To him, Dag was a threat that had infiltrated the family. During this period, rumors spread that Christian was talking about killing Dag. This was not just an outburst of anger, but a sign of an inevitable catastrophe. Christian obsessively believed Cheyenne's claims that Dag Drollet was treating her badly. Christian's protective instinct was combined with the feeling of helplessness from his own childhood. That night, Brando was not at the mansion, but the tension between Christian and Dag reached its peak. On the night of May 16, 1990, within the high walls of the Brando mansion, the ugliest face of chaos and darkness would take the stage. Brando was not at the mansion that night. He was on an overseas flight, likely pursuing a new film project or some other unknown adventure. Christian Brando, fueled by years of accumulated anger, alcohol, and drugs, was at the peak of his obsession to protect his sister. Near midnight, an argument began in Christian and Dag Drollet's room. This argument quickly escalated when Christian pulled the gun. Christian would later claim in his defense that his intention was merely to scare Dag. What would be judged was not just the moment the trigger was pulled, but how the Brando family's years of neglect manifested at that moment. A brief struggle, and then, the moment, the sound of a gunshot. This sound did not only end Dag Drollet's life, it also began the end of Marlon Brando's life. The bullet struck Dag Drollet in the face. The young man died instantly at the scene. Absolute panic reigned in the mansion. Cheyenne went into a hysterical crisis over the sight. However, Christian, as if trained by his genius father, remained composed at that moment and made his first phone call to his father. Brando was on the plane, in the middle of the ocean, away from all the world's noise. And the voice on the phone whispered the most horrifying truth to him. "Dad, I killed someone." These words were like a dagger plunged into Marlon Brando's heart. In that instant, all his fame, all his power, and all the wealth he had accumulated throughout his career became meaningless. As soon as Brando landed, he rushed to Los Angeles to manage the chaos. The Hollywood legend went directly from the airport to the crime scene, his own house. The police had already blockaded the house. Cameras and journalists were there to record Brando's every move. Brando, in this moment of crisis, turned his acting genius into emergency management. He immediately spoke with police detectives. Before his lawyers even arrived, he persuaded his son to immediately surrender. This was Brando's most timely and cool-headed decision. By not allowing his son to flee or tamper with evidence, he increased Christian's chance of presenting the crime as an accident. This murder was the beginning of a storm that went deep into the Brando family. Cheyenne completely collapsed mentally after her brother's arrest. The trauma of the event shattered her already fragile mental health. Cheyenne even claimed that she was the one who committed the murder, but this was lost amid the lies and delusions in court. Brando was now fighting on two fronts: his imprisoned son on one side, and his daughter on the brink of suicide on the other. He was a desperate father, witnessing the disaster of his own children before the eyes of the entire world. This chaos left him more alone than ever before. His focus was not on studios, sets, or fans, but solely on his son's fate. And very soon, putting aside all his splendor and ego, he would be weeping an admission in court to save his son. This case was not just a murder trial. It was the biggest stage for the moral collapse of Hollywood. The media was there to record Brando's every move, every twitch of his expression. The whole world expected to watch the genius manipulate the legal system. But Brando, once again, did the unexpected. He used this stage for his own confession. The most unforgettable moment of the trial was the day Marlon Brando himself took the witness stand. As he walked toward the stand, no matter how expensive the jacket he wore, the weight of the burden on his shoulders overshadowed everything. In that moment, it was not the invincible authority of Vito Corleone from The Godfather that appeared on his face, but the spirit of the helpless, victimized young man from on the waterfront. When Brando began to speak, his voice was neither the rich baritone of the studio nor the flashy sound of a star. His voice was trembling, muffled, as if his heart was squeezing in his throat with every word. He was speaking not to the jury, the judge, or the lawyers. He was speaking to his own conscience. His eyes were filled with tears, but these tears were not part of a role. They were the salty drops of years of neglect, guilt, and regret. Brando's admission was not a defense, but a reckoning of conscience. He claimed that he did not just believe his son Christian was not solely responsible for the murder, but that he himself had paved the way for it. Brando's devastating testimony. "Your Honor, members of the jury, I am here not to defend Christian, but to accuse myself. I failed to give Christian the love and stability he needed amid the chaos of my marriage with his mother. I left that little boy alone while I was constantly preoccupied with different women and different projects. Christian is a victim of my mistake, of my selfish lifestyle. If I had been a better father, if I had been there, if I could have protected him from the feeling of abandonment from my own childhood, Dag Drollet would be alive today. My son committed this crime, yes, but the foundation of this crime was laid by my own neglect. I acted as a friend to him instead of guiding him as a father. I taught him chaos, not life. Now, I see that all my genius and all my fame are not enough to soothe this pain. Please, if Christian is to be punished, know that the biggest share of that punishment is already in my soul. I will live the rest of my life with this guilt. This moment was a turning point in American legal history. Brando was more convincing than in any role he had ever played as an actor. He showed the jury the human fragility behind the Brando surname. The jury was not just judging a murder case. They were judging a father's regret. The result was favorable to Brando. The jury acquitted Christian Brando of the murder charge and decided to convict him of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. As Brando left the courtroom, he smiled at the cameras outside. His son was saved. But everyone knew that the tears shed in that courtroom that day would continue to flow from Marlon Brando's soul forever. This courtroom drama did not only close a case, it also opened a new chapter of the curse that hung over the Brando family. Because in this brutal story, there was a more tragic end: Cheyenne's suicide. The victory in that courtroom closed one chapter in Marlon Brando's life. He saved his son from prison. However, this was only one act of the tragedy that hung over the Brando family. The curse had not yet spoken its last word. The second and most devastating victim of this brutal story was his daughter, Cheyenne Brando. The trauma of the murder trial completely shattered Cheyenne, who was already struggling with serious mental health issues. The intensity of the event overwhelmed Cheyenne's fragile psyche. She felt like both the perpetrator and the innocent victim of Dag Drollet's death, grappling with an overwhelming sense of guilt and mental breakdown. Brando took his daughter to his private island in Tahiti, Tetiaroa, to save her. This paradise island, sadly, became a symbol of isolation and helplessness for Cheyenne, rather than a sanctuary. Her father provided her with the best caregivers and the best doctors. But no amount of wealth could mend a shattered soul. Cheyenne's condition deteriorated over the years. She struggled to receive treatment. Her anger towards her father and her self-blame consumed her internally. She was now just a lost, forgotten shadow within the chaos of her family. On April 16, 1995, approximately 5 years after the murder trial, Cheyenne Brando took her own life on Tetiaroa Island, while under her father's supervision. She was only 25 years old. This news completely destroyed all the defense mechanisms Brando had tried to build in his final years. He had saved his son from prison, but he could not save his daughter. Both his children became victims of his own chaotic life, emotional void, and neglect. After this event, Marlon Brando withdrew completely from the cinema world. He was no longer just the genius actor interested in films. He was a man who was spiritually bankrupt. He spent his final years in semi-seclusion at his Brentwood mansion. He gained excessive weight. This was the emotional wall Brando built against the world. His goal was simple: to be invisible. He wanted to be alone with his pain. He lived in his million-dollar mansion, but in reality, he was in the deepest pit of loneliness. Although many people were around him, no one could truly reach him. In 2004, Marlon Brando passed away at the age of 80. The official cause of death was physical, but everyone who knew him understood. Brando died of a broken heart. He was a long-suffering victim of the spiritual collapse that began with his son's murder trial and his daughter's suicide. Brando conquered Hollywood with all his genius, but he lost the battle to keep his family together. While he played gods on screen, in real life, he failed in his most fundamental duty as a father. This bitter truth behind Marlon Brando's ruin teaches us a lesson. Fame and money are just temporary masks. A man's true legacy is not in the works he leaves behind, but in the emotional well-being of the children he leaves behind. And Brando's legacy, unfortunately, was written as murder, suicide, and endless regret. He was the world's greatest actor, but in his own home, he was just a lost and lonely father. Don't forget to comment on what kind of father figure you think Brando was after these events. We recommend that anyone struggling with such sensitive issues seek professional support. See you in the next Untold story.